After e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3. So now black will play bishop b4. So in this video we're going through the Winawer variation of the French defense and what to do next. So the move I recommend, well, okay, first of all the bishop is spinning the knight and the pawn is attacking the pawn in e4. So that means the knight is no longer protecting it. So we don't want to lose a pawn for free. We're not going to be able to recover that pawn easily. So we have to play e5. This is the main move. It blocks the center. It will make this bishop in c8 a weakness, and this bishop in b4, which has been brought all the way here, is going to have to move again. So we're going to force black to move the bishop again, and after the bishop takes the knight, black is going to be left with the bad bishop, the one in c8, and we're going to have both bishops. So this is not supposed to be good, but the Winawer variation could be just very annoying. It might lead you into a territory that you don't understand, and so you end up losing even if this defense is not supposed to be the best. So let's talk about the ideas here, right? So the move after e5, the theory now goes on with c5. Black is trying to undermine the center, and there's no way to defend the d4 pawn with another pawn. And so because we don't want to lose this chain of pawns in the center, we can't really play knight f3 because of takes, and we're going to have one pawn. I mean, it's still almost acceptable, but we're not going to do that. After c5, the right move is a3. We're going to attack the bishop and ask it a question like, you've been moving already, so you're gonna move again. You're gonna take my knight. If the bishop takes the knight, we're happy. We're gonna look at all the variation one by one. But anyway, let's start with bishop a5. Let's say black wants to keep the bishop pair. Also because this is gonna be the bishop in c8 is gonna be the only bishop left, and it's not a good one. Now the move is b4. And so what's happening now? Bishop a5 was not a good move. That's the truth, because now we have two attackers on the c5 square, and we will be able to win a pawn, unless black wants to take in b4, of course. So let's go through that first. Let's say black takes in b4. Well, black has the option of taking in b4 or taking in d4. So let's say black takes in b4 first. Now the move is, well, of course we don't take back, because then the knight takes back, and then after queen c7 we're going to have a lot of pressure on this knight. It doesn't look any good, and we're really not doing well, and black will be better. So now after the c pawn takes in b4, knight b5, we're threatening to place the knight in this amazing square where the knight is a minor piece protected by a pawn. So that's fantastic. It checks the king. It cannot be taken. And so now we're done a pawn, and let's see what happens if black were to give us a check. Let's say black takes the pawn and says, okay, I'm going to build my advantage. I'm winning another pawn, and I'm also giving a check, so what can go wrong? Now white plays c3. Right, so we've built our beloved pawn structure. We like it like that. Yes, we have a backward pawn in c3, but our development is better. Yes, you might argue that we only have developed a knight, but the thing is, the possibility to develop our pieces is much better, right? You've got a bishop that can be developed into an amazing square already, potentially stopping the king from castling, depending on what black does. This bishop is good to be developed. Our queen also can go to a4, potentially threatening a discovered check. And our rook is already able to go to an open file, since we don't have a b pawn anymore, or it can go to a3 and still stay on an open file. Black doesn't have the same freedom. Black's pieces don't have the same freedom. Well, let's go ahead now. So the bishop is attacking the pawn in c3. It will be amazing for this bishop to take the pawn and then win the rook. The problem is that the knight is there. So what happens if, I don't know, black tries to kick the knight away so that the bishop would be winning the pawn and the game? This is already a blunder. So a6 now to remove the knight so that the bishop is attacking c3. It's a move that needs to be punished because it's breaking the principle of moving too many pawns and not developing the minor pieces at first. So after knight d6 check, the king goes to f8. Well, when I'm not just assuming that the king goes to f8. Any other square would be even worse. The king to e7, for example, will run straight into bishop a3. That looks terrible, threatening discovered check and so on. Whereas king d7, for example, I haven't even looked at this, to be honest, not with details, because I can already think of something like queen a4 or like even knight f7. It's not worth looking at this. And if it does happen to you, then just enjoy a very pleasant position where you're completely winning. So after knight d6 check and king goes to f8, the move now is queen f3. We're threatening checkmate, and also the white knight is threatening to take the bishop for free, which means that the queen will not be able to save the checkmate in f7 with queen e7, simply because this is a free bishop. So the queen will have to still defend the bishop, and so the queen will have to do either queen to c7 or d7. Well, queen to c7 makes much more sense because it's also putting pressure on this pawn and not blocking the bishop to the only square where it could be developed to. potentially, not right now, but potentially. So after queen to c7, also I gotta mention that knight here to h6 is not good because the bishop will just take it, so that the knight will not be defending f7. So after queen to c7, the move now is knight to e2. We're not just defending this pawn because of course we have a strong plan, we have a strong attack going on. The thing is that we kind of need to do it because otherwise black will be able to take, and we're just losing too much material. So after knight to e2, our attack just had a break just for a move. Then we're going to go on knight e2, and now black goes on with the best move, knight to c6, and now bishop to e3, which is, by the way, an unstoppable threat, right? There was no way for black to block this move from happening. Bishop takes a3 with a threat of discovered check. The threat probably something like knight b5, winning the queen. So what's the best move for black right now? Well, it's really hard to find. Black cannot develop the pieces, the knight here, or the bishop, whatever. Any other move, for example, we'll just run into knight b5 check, winning the knight will win the queen because of the check by the bishop. So best move now suggested by the engine is knight to d4. The knight's attacking the queen, and now thing is, we're still going to play knight to b5. After knight to b5, let's say black plays knight to e7, develops a knight. It wouldn't make much sense to just move the king again without developing a piece, but anyway, after that, we're not going to take the queen, otherwise we lose our queen. We got an ugly pawn structure, which is going to take the knight. Our pawn in c3 is well defended, we don't have to worry, and white goes on being up a piece, and that's an excellent advantage. Future plan to just place the bishop into the square d6 and get this rook in a1 to be fully operational, and as soon as the pressure is released from the square c3, just go on with a very good position. Right, going back to the initial position, after black plays the pawn to c5, we're going to play a3, and the bishop goes back, right, in the line that we're looking at. We play b4, pawn takes b4, this is the line we're looking at, and now of course we don't take back, we play knight to b5. So pawn takes now comes with check, just like the same line as before, c3. Now earlier we saw what happens after a6. Let's see what happens. Black now retreats the bishop, it goes to c7. Well, b6 is not really worth looking because it's basically the same thing as before. Knight d6 check, and then development of the bishop, queen f3 potentially, and so on. Let's see what happens after bishop to c7. Now this doesn't give us the possibility to go for the same plan, simply because the square d6 is protected by the bishop as well. So knight d6 wouldn't work, we will be taken and even lose a pawn. But even without a pawn, like we wouldn't want to lose this outpost, so we're just going to wait after bishop to c7. And of course I don't want to take this bishop either, because that's helping black to develop the queen and put more pressure on the c3 square. And also this is a great knight. We've been moving this knight for a bit, knight c3, knight c3, knight b5. Why would we give it away? So after that move, bishop to d3. This is a great square for the bishop against the French defense to be placed in, generally speaking. Black says, okay, now I can kick the knight away, and black is fine with the bishop being taken. It's fine with the knight d6, which doesn't make sense. And now what's the thematic move that we're going to be seeing a lot against this defense? Queen to g4. So now we're threatening this pawn, threatening to trap the rook, and well, of course, since we're going to be winning a rook, we don't care about the knight being taken, right? So of course black cannot take the knight because of that. Queen g7, and then the knight will have to take the knight will have to move, and we will win the rook. If the knight doesn't move, we will still win the rook, and then potentially there's an infiltration of the bishop here, and we're going to be winning completely. So now black plays, well, black will have two usual options. So king f8 here, this kind of move to protect g7, or g6. In this case, we're going to go through g6 because in this specific scenario, king here runs into bishop a3, which is just deadly for black. So black plays g6. After g6, now our knight is under attack, and we just take the bishop. Only move, queen takes back, and now the thematic knight e2. It will happen a lot against Winawer. So we're going to stop the line here because there's just too many things that can happen, but like the reason why we're stopping the line here is because there's a good advantage for white. Black doesn't have the dark square bishop, so there's going to be weaknesses here in the king side. This threat of bishop takes a3 is unstoppable. No matter what queen e7 doesn't make sense because the bishop will be protected anyway. So bishop e7, the knight moving here will just make this king very ugly. We have a bishop that can infiltrate any moment, and our king is one step away from castling. Right, I'm just going back a few moves. Right, here we were when the pawn was attacking the knight in b5, and we played queen g4. We're threatening something more than a knight, so therefore we leave the knight in b5, we don't care. What happens after black plays this move? This is an idea. The idea basically is that after queen g7, this is pretty typical in the Winawer actually. We're going to look at some stuff like this. Queen g7, and then rook g8 attacks the queen cannot take the rook because of the knight, the queen will have to move, and black will have some sort of very good g-file under the control of the rook. So after a move like that, knight e7, we play knight takes. So we don't really have that win. After queen g7 and rook g8, both our queen and our knight will be hanging. Well, okay, we could take the bishop afterwards, maybe. But like, let's just take the bishop now, and then after queen to c7, we play knight e2. The good thing about this is that rook g8 does not come with an attack on the queen, which means that black cannot claim the control of the g file simply because rook g8 is met by bishop h7, so that's just wrong. And also, I like the idea of castling as soon as possible. So knight e2 is, by the way, also necessary to protect the pawn in c3. And we might not even castle here. Next moves, we're threatening. Right now, we're also going to stop this line here because this is already very similar to the previous position. And also, it's just winning for white by quite a lot. The advantage is great. The threat now, if it was white to move again, of course, we will go for the g7 pawn. And after rook moves, we're going to play queen to h7. I don't mind this rook going to g2 in this case because bishop to e3 is threatening all sorts of stuff. So what can black do to stop it? Well, g6 will come with the usual weaknesses on the dark squares. We're going to be castling. We're not going to be able to take the pawn in g6, so this rook in g8 will not be able to go for the plan of attacking this g2 square. And our plan is going to be the same. Just going to go on with the two bishops, place a bishop in d6 maybe, infiltrate the queen. So instead of g6, let's say black castles, which could be a potential idea. Now bishop h6 doesn't work because of knight g6. We're not really threatening a checkmate. Now we play queen h5, threatening a checkmate. Again, a move like g6 will be met by queen g5 and the usual domination of the light squares. You know, ideas like queen f6 and then g7 with the bishop. Also ideas like h4, h5, h6 work. Right, back at the starting position. After c5 we play a3. And after the bishop goes back to a5, we play b4. Pawn takes b4 and knight to b5. What happens if black doesn't take the pawn but rather just pushes this pawn here and still gives a discovered check? We still play c3. Nothing changes. This pawn isn't going anywhere next because we'll take it. Again, we're still going for the usual threat of knight d6. So the scenario is very similar. The only difference though is that this time we don't have the bishop a3 idea. Anyway, black now can continue with knight to c6. So what's this idea about? Simply develop the pieces. So instead of moving too many pawns, black might just develop the pieces. Now we go on with rook to b1. The threat of knight d6 is always there anyway, so we don't have to play it immediately. So let's just mention one more scenario where the black king goes to f8. Let's say now black plays a6. Right? The idea in this type of position is knight d6 and king f8. This is not like just like completely winning or anything. You know, it's just like a very good position for white because this rook will be in trouble, will not be able to develop. And in this specific, I'm just going to mention like a few plans we can make. There's not many ways that black can play because black's position is terrible. But what we're going to do now is just to mention the plan. More or less, we're just going to take the bishop pair from our opponent, get an open file for the rook, and then apply pressure on the weak b7 pawn. Now we play rook b3, just simple as that. We're putting pressure on this square, threatening to play knight to b7. The rook is defended by the queen. We don't have to worry about rook b8. So after this move, how do we go on after this idea? Bishop c7, that makes sense. This bishop is happy to take the knight. After pawn takes, queen takes back, we have lost our nice center. So we don't want that to happen. We're going to take the bishop. It looks weird as we're giving this amazing knight for this horrible bishop in c8. The problem is that the thing is we couldn't move the knight anywhere else and we had to give the knight away. We're taking the bad bishop from our opponent, which is suspicious. Why would we do that? Well, the reason is simple. If black rook were to take the knight, then we just take with this free pawn. It's not poisoned, and then we can move the rook all the way to b1, and we're up a pawn. Besides, we have the bishop pair. So if queen takes, which defends the pawn in b7, the plan now is bishop. The move is bishop to d3. The plan is simple. We just want to play rook back to b1, just to avoid the opponent from winning a tempo. Maybe plays the knight in c4, which I wouldn't like because it will keep our c3 pawn backwards forever. So after rook to b1, the plan is to play h4, h5, and so on. This knight cannot develop to h6. Feel free to take it if you want to, and then queen d2 threatening to take in h6 again. So it's black to move. Let's say black develops the knight to this square, right? This is actually typical. The knight wants to go maybe to g6 or to f5. So the knight to that square, you just remove the rook again just to avoid the tempo attack knight a5, knight c4. And how do we respond to a move like knight f5? Well, a move like knight f5 is met by bishop takes, pawn takes, so we're giving up our bishop pair. But the reason for that is that black's pawn structure now is terrible. He's got a double pawn and an isolated pawn. Future idea is to play on knight e2, castle, queen b3, all of these moves. White's center is blocking blacks from getting any initiative. The queen to b3 will be applying pressure on the d5 square, on the b7 square. These ideas are unstoppable in a way that there's just nothing that black can do to not make them happen because the position is so weird and black just doesn't have any freedom. This queen is silly, the bishop is silly, bishop a5 just wouldn't threaten anything. Instead, a move like knight to g6 is met by the usual idea, in this case h4. The idea is to remove the knight, while h5, which is also pursuing our goal of pushing these pawns. We wanted to push these pawns anyway. So h4 comes with the tempo. We're going to play h5. Eventually, the knight will go away. will be able to infiltrate our pieces. A move like queen g4, bishop g5, they're all possible. Even queen h5 depends on what black does. Let's say black plays h5. Well, here's how we're going to be playing this. How to exploit this position at the f7, the g7 pawn, and h5 pawn like that. White's idea is now just bishop to g5 and take the knight. You could also take the knight first. It doesn't make much difference. Bishop takes and then pawn takes. And then the idea is to play knight h3. And knight f4, knight g6. Also put the bishop in g5 as soon as you can, because it's a minor piece, cannot be attacked by any pawn, controlling crucial squares, and the queen is able to go to f3 soon. Black can try to put up a resistance as much as possible, but white's pieces are superior. White's center is better. Black's pawn structure is destroyed. Black rook in h8 and a8 will not be able to be developed for a long time. That's how we're going to be playing this specific line. Right, here we are at the starting position. Bishop b4 is met by e5, and then c5 you play a3. Bishop a5, we're going to play b4, and now let's look at another scenario. Black takes the pawn in d4, comes with an attack on the knight. We're attacking the bishop. So what to play now? Again, a recurring pattern. Knight to b5. The idea is simple. We don't want to lose the knight in c3, and then black will be able to play a pawn maybe to d4 later on, and I don't like this at all. Not to mention that I don't want to be taking this bishop in a5 because it gives white a double isolated pawn in the a5, prevents the development of the bishop to this lovely diagonal. Especially we're going to be exploiting the fact that we block the center. The dark square bishop came along this diagonal, so we want to take control of that diagonal. So after knight to b5, we are still attacking the bishop, so this bishop will have to move now. Let's say the bishop goes to b6, because we're just looking at as many ideas as possible so that you can familiarize with how to play against the Winawer. Bishop c7, for example. Let's say the black player in this case doesn't want to put the bishop in a condition to be potentially taken. So let's say bishop d6, bishop e6. Oh, and one more reason, the bishop is still defending. So this pawn, in case we take it back with the knight, maybe bishop takes, queen takes, and black goes on after an important swap, which allows black to play a normal game, especially when we get rid of our amazing knight in b5. So now we play bishop to d3, usual move. So how does the game continue? Right, as I say in literally every video, of course we're not going to be able to remember all the millions variations. It's just impossible. But of course what we're going to be doing is memorize the pattern. So you know that I'm not going to go through pawn a6 now, because you get what to do next. You know that you're going to play knight d6. I'm just going to play other moves because we're going to be looking at all the possible setups and how to exploit them. So let's say, for example, now black plays knight to c6, applying pressure on this pawn. How do we defend that pawn? We defend it with the pawn, right? We lost our d pawn. At least we're going to be keeping control of this center. And this is a typical move against the Steinitz, for example. You want to control the center with the f pawn. You don't have to worry about opening the f pawn and making this king weaker, simply because black has no access to creating any danger, right? Queen h4 will be met by g3. It's not a problem. Then queen will have to move away. We don't really care about this because in the French defense, in closed games, your king is not like he really badly needs the castle. It's not that very important, although it depends, of course. Anyway, after f4, black needs to speed up development. Let's say knight g to e7. Again, if black were to play a6, you know what to do. Knight g to e7. Well, in this case, this is met by this move, knight d6. So this is important to look at, because after this type of move, the knight couldn't go to f6. So after knight to d6 check and king to f8, the reason why we made this check now is because we're exploiting the fact that the black knight has moved from g8. It's no longer protecting the h6 square. So in this scenario, always remember to play queen to h5. You're threatening checkmate here. The queen will not be able to go to e8 to stop it because of the knight. And this can be met by g6, but the difference is that the knight, which has now been moved to e7, is not protecting h6, so we can infiltrate our pieces there. And so this is terrible for black. So after queen h5, of course, g6 is a really stupid move. So what does black play? Black can play knight g6. This looks way more logical, especially French Winawer players. They used to play this kind of move. The knight was in e7 to go to g6. And now it's also stopping the checkmate threat, also allowing the queen to reach more squares to defend the mate threat. So now white continues with knight f3. The idea is to play knight g5 and then knight f7. Of course, this seems slow, but what can black do? Black cannot attack our queen, and it cannot really play h6 to stop the knight from going to g5, simply because bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes again. It's horrible. It's horrible for black. So let's look at this other idea. Bishop c7 with the idea of taking the knight, forcing the knight away at least. Also, by the way, this is the only thing to do for black, right? Black doesn't have any other option. This queen isn't really able to go anywhere close to this g5 square, and the threat of knight f7 supported by the other knight in g5 is just too strong. So bishop c7. What do we play now? This bishop is really determined to take this knight and get rid of the trouble. Knight takes bishop. right? We've seen this before. In this case, let's say rook takes, queen takes, doesn't make much difference. What we're going to do now is castle. White is so much better now. The advantage is huge. What's the next idea after castling? Whatever black does, we will play f5. It's inevitable. f5 comes with an attack on the knight. This, if f5 move, there's a rook attack on f7 very soon. This pawn's attacking the knight. What can black do? If black takes the pawn in f5, then bishop f5. The idea is to play knight g5. Potentially bishop takes knight. This pawn will be pinned. This pawn is pinned as well because of queen takes rook. The position is extremely pleasant to play. White's got an advantage of about 2 pieces according to engine. What happens if instead, one move ago, what happens if instead knight takes e5? The knight gets rid of the problem by taking the pawn. Then here's a lot of brilliant moves available. First of all, we will start with pawn takes. Now, of course, pawn takes will be a suicide because then we have a discovered check, and knight takes here just doesn't improve the situation for black because then rook takes. We just got too much pressure on f7. We could do rook takes f7, pawn takes back, and so rook takes f7, and then the queen, the pawn are attacking there as well. So let's say black plays a move like this, right? How do we exploit this type of scenario? We have to look at the threat we're making. We're threatening queen f7 checkmate, which is stopped because of the knight. So the move now is simple. b5. We're attacking this knight. This knight will no longer be able to protect the knight in e5. It would be amazing if this knight were to be so silly to move away, so we can just take this knight for free and then go for checkmate. After knight takes, knight comes with check. How do we take back? We take back with the pawn. This is amazing. Taking back with the rook will allow knight e5 with an attack on the rook and on the bishop. Black will be able to get out of trouble, maybe after queen e7. So we take back with the pawn, and now after the knight moves, well, no other square is available. Knight e7 will come with the checkmate. So after knight to e5, f4, right? We're just deflecting the piece away from the square. And now black is going to keep playing. He's not going to get checkmated because he's just going to play something like knight g6 maybe, or whatever. He's going to sacrifice something, and then white is completely winning.